The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chambers hummed with the voices of 1,000 species. Admiral ZYXTH of the Valerian Empire adjusted his ceremonial armor plates as he gazed down at the holographic display showing Earth's latest military demonstration. The blue marble of humanity's homeworld rotated slowly, marked with red indicators showing their armed forces. "Primitive," muttered Commander Veltar, her insectoid mandibles clicking with disdain. "Look at their weapons. Chemical propulsion. Metal projectiles. They still use explosives that require oxygen to function." General Korath, a towering reptilian with scales that shifted color with his emotions, leaned forward in his hover seat. "Their vehicles crawl across the ground like ancient beasts. No energy shields, no plasma weapons, no quantum displacement drives. How exactly did they survive long enough to develop space travel?" The question hung in the air as dozens of alien representatives murmured their agreement. Earth's military had been under observation for 6 months since first contact protocols were established. The humans had been eager to join the Galactic Defense Coalition, offering their soldiers for the upcoming war against the Devourers, an ancient machine race that had begun awakening from dormancy across the galaxy. Admiral ZYXTH activated his vocal enhancer, and his deep voice resonated through the chamber. "Fellow council members, we've all seen the tactical reports. Human soldiers require sleep for 8 hours out of every 24. They need constant supplies of water and organic nutrients. Their reaction time averages 0.2 seconds, which would be considered sluggish even by civilian standards among our species." The hologram shifted to show human soldiers in training exercises. They moved with purpose, but, to the alien observers, everything seemed impossibly slow. A human marksman taking aim would be vaporized 3 times over by a Kelnari warrior before he could even sight his target. "Their psychological profiles are equally concerning," continued Commander Veltar, accessing her datapad with one of her forearms. "They suffer from something called post-traumatic stress disorder when exposed to combat situations. Many become unable to function after witnessing the death of their comrades. How can warriors who break so easily be of any use against the Devourers?" Dr. Millith, the chief xenobiologist, projected anatomical scans of humans beside other coalition species. "Their physical limitations are severe. Average lifespan of only 80 years. Maximum running speed of 30 km per hour for short bursts. They can't survive in most atmospheric conditions without artificial breathing apparatus. Their bone structure would shatter under acceleration forces that we consider routine." General Karatha's scales shifted to a deep purple, indicating his amusement. "I've reviewed their historical military tactics. They still fight in formations on the ground, using cover and concealment like animals hiding from predators. Meanwhile, the Kethmori have perfected teleportation strikes, and the Valerian shock troops can phase through solid matter." The council chamber erupted in various forms of alien laughter. Crystalline beings chimed like wind instruments, gaseous entities fluctuated with harmonious frequencies, and mechanical representatives produced rhythmic electronic beats. Ambassador Thexare, representing the Peaceful Harmony Coalition, stood gracefully. Her species resembled living light wrapped in flowing energy fields. "Perhaps we judge too harshly. Humans have shown remarkable creativity in certain areas. Their art and music demonstrate emotional depth that many species find intriguing." "Emotional depth won't stop a Devourer assault fleet," scoffed General Korath. "The machines don't appreciate poetry while they're stripping planets down to their atomic components." Admiral ZYXTH brought up footage from the Kepler Prime incident, where an entire star system had been consumed by Devourer harvesters in less than 6 hours. The mechanical swarms moved like living metal storms, each individual unit the size of a spacecraft, working in perfect coordination to dismantle everything in their path. "The Devourers have awakened 12 hive clusters so far," Admiral ZYXTH announced grimly. "Each cluster contains approximately 10 million individual units. They adapt to our weapons in real time, learning from every encounter. We need soldiers who can think beyond conventional tactics, who can adapt as quickly as the enemy." "And, you believe humans possess this quality?" asked Dr. Millith skeptically. "Their military history suggests otherwise," Commander Veltar added, pulling up historical data. "Look at their conflicts. World War I, millions died charging across open fields into machine gun fire, repeating the same failed tactics for years. Their generals were slow to adapt, rigid in their thinking. The human representative, General Patricia Morrison, had been sitting quietly throughout the discussion. She was a compact woman with graying hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths the aliens couldn't quite understand. Finally, she stood and requested permission to address the council. Honorable members, General Morrison began, her voice clear and steady. We understand your concerns about humanity's military capabilities. Our technology is indeed primitive compared to yours. Our soldiers are physically weaker and require more resources to maintain. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Many representatives seemed surprised by her candid admission. However, General Morrison continued, we believe there are qualities that don't show up in technical specifications or physical measurements. Human soldiers possess something that might prove valuable in this conflict: adaptability born from necessity, and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat even when logic suggests surrender. General Karatha's scales shifted to a skeptical yellow-green. Words are easy to speak, General Morrison. Do you have evidence to support these claims? We propose a test, General Morrison replied without hesitation. A military simulation where human forces face scenarios designed by your best tactical minds. Let our performance speak for our potential. The council erupted in discussion. Voices in dozens of languages and communication methods filled the chamber as representatives debated among themselves. Admiral ZYXTH called for order, his vocal enhancer cutting through the chaos. Commander Veltar was the first to speak. What would be the parameters of this simulation? Standard coalition warfare scenarios, General Morrison suggested. Urban combat, space-based operations, defensive positions, and assault missions. Use the same criteria you would apply to evaluate any member species. Dr. Millith projected casualty statistics from recent Devourer encounters. The mortality rate in actual combat against the Devourers is 73% for first engagements. Are your soldiers prepared for such losses? Our soldiers understand the risks, General Morrison replied quietly. They've always understood that some battles require sacrifice. What they've never understood is surrender. Ambassador Thexaray's energy field pulsed with interest. There is wisdom in allowing this demonstration. Perhaps we will learn something unexpected. General Karath leaned back in his seat, scales shifting to an amused orange. Very well. But, when your soldiers fail these simulations, humanity will accept a support role in the war effort. Non-combat positions only. And, if we succeed? General Morrison asked. Define success, Admiral ZYXTH challenged. Our forces complete the missions with acceptable casualties and demonstrate tactical effectiveness equivalent to coalition standards. The alien representatives exchanged glances, mental communications, and energy pulses. The concept seemed almost absurd to most of them. How could a species that still used gunpowder-based weapons compete with civilizations that had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe? Admiral ZYXTH consulted with his tactical advisors, a group of Valerian military experts whose craniums had been enhanced with quantum processing nodes. After several minutes of rapid-fire discussion in their native language of harmonic frequencies, he turned back to the assembly. The Galactic Defense Coalition accepts your proposal, General Morrison. We will design comprehensive combat simulations using our most advanced holographic training systems. Your soldiers will face the same scenarios we use to train our elite units. Commander Veltar added, we will observe everything. Reaction times, tactical decisions, adaptability under pressure, unit cohesion under stress. Every metric will be analyzed and compared to coalition standards. The simulations will include scenarios based on actual Devourer encounters, Dr. Millith noted. Your soldiers will face enemies that learn and adapt in real time, just as the machines do. General Morrison nodded solemnly. We understand the stakes. When do we begin? Preparation will take one standard galactic week, Admiral ZYXTH announced. We need time to construct appropriate simulation chambers and gather our best tactical minds to design the scenarios. Use this time wisely, General Morrison. Choose your best soldiers, because this will likely be their only chance to prove humanity's worth to the Coalition. As the council session concluded, representatives began filing out of the chamber, their conversations focused on the upcoming demonstration. Most seemed to view it as an entertaining diversion rather than a serious evaluation. The consensus was clear: humans would provide a brief spectacle before being assigned to support roles. General Morrison remained behind as the chamber emptied, studying the holographic displays that still showed Devourer attack patterns and Coalition fleet movements. She understood better than anyone what her soldiers would be facing. The aliens weren't just testing human military capability, they were testing human will. Admiral ZYXTH approached her as his aides gathered their equipment. General Morrison, I respect your courage in proposing this test. But, I feel obligated to warn you, the scenarios we design will not be forgiving. Many of our own veteran units have failed these simulations. Admiral, General Morrison replied, meeting his multifaceted gaze directly, you're about to learn something important about human soldiers. We don't just fight to win. We fight to protect what matters to us. And, right now, what matters is proving that Earth has something valuable to contribute to this war. As the massive chamber lights dimmed and the holographic displays powered down, only time would tell whether humanity's confidence was justified or if they were about to face a humiliating reality check that would define their role in the galaxy for generations to come. The simulation chambers were already under construction, and the greatest military minds in the galaxy were gathering to design challenges that would push human soldiers beyond their limits. What none of them realized was that pushing humans beyond their limits was when they often performed best. The transport ship Endeavour hummed through hyperspace toward the Coalition testing facility on Nexus Station. Inside its cramped quarters, General Morrison reviewed the files of the soldiers she had selected for the simulation. Each profile represented hundreds of hours of analysis, choosing not just the most skilled fighters, but those who embodied the quality she believed would surprise the galactic community. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos sat in the corner, methodically cleaning her rifle for the third time since departure. The weapon was an ancient design by galactic standards, firing solid projectiles using chemical propulsion. Santos had grown up in the favelas of Sao Paulo, where survival meant learning to fight with whatever was available. She had earned her stripes in urban warfare, specializing in close-quarters combat where human agility and intuition often mattered more than raw firepower. Ma'am, Santos said without looking up from her weapon, what exactly are we walking into? The briefing mentioned combat simulations, but the details were pretty thin. General Morrison set down her datapad and looked around at the 12 soldiers crammed into the transport. Each had been chosen for specific skills: urban combat, reconnaissance, demolitions, communications, medical support, and leadership under pressure. What they had in common wasn't superior physical abilities, but something harder to quantify. We're going to face scenarios designed by alien military experts who consider us primitive, Morrison explained. They expect us to fail. They've probably designed challenges that play to their species' strengths while highlighting our weaknesses. Corporal David Kim, a communications specialist from Seoul, frowned as he adjusted his equipment. So we're set up to lose? Not exactly, Morrison replied. They want to test us fairly, but they don't understand what makes human soldiers effective. They see our limitations but miss our advantages. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, a former Navy SEAL with experience in underwater demolitions, looked up from her equipment check. What advantages? I've seen the intelligence reports on Coalition species. They're faster, stronger, and have technology we can't match. They think in terms of individual superiority, Morrison explained. Faster reflexes, stronger bodies, better weapons. But they might not understand how human units function as interconnected systems. They might not expect our ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. The ship's intercom crackled to life with an alien voice speaking heavily accented English. Human transport, prepare for arrival at Nexus Station. You will be met by Coalition representatives upon docking. Through the viewport, Nexus Station grew from a distant point of light to a massive construct that dwarfed anything humanity had built. The station was a sphere nearly 50 kilometers in diameter, its surface covered with docking ports, sensor arrays, and defensive installations. Ships from dozens of species moved in carefully coordinated patterns around it, their alien designs ranging from crystalline structures to flowing organic curves. "Look at the size of that thing," whispered Private Johnson, a sniper from Texas whose calm demeanor masked exceptional marksmanship skills. "How do they even build something like that?" "Same way we built cities," replied Sergeant Major Torres, a veteran of 3 conflicts who served as Morrison's senior enlisted advisor. "One piece at a time, with a lot of patience and cooperation. The question is whether they can fight as well as they build." As the Endeavour settled into its designated docking berth, the human soldiers gathered their gear. Each carried standard Earth military equipment, assault rifles, sidearms, body armor, communications gear, medical supplies, and various specialized tools. By Coalition standards, their loadout was laughably primitive, but it was familiar and reliable. The airlock cycled open to reveal a reception committee of alien representatives. Admiral ZYXTH stood at the center, flanked by military officials from several species. Their expressions ranged from polite curiosity to barely concealed amusement. General Morrison, Admiral ZYXTH greeted, his translator device converting his harmonic language into English. "Welcome to Nexus Station. I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Adequate, Admiral. My soldiers are ready to begin whenever you are." Commander Veltar stepped forward, her forearms clasping datapads and scanning devices. "We have prepared comprehensive physical and mental evaluations before the simulations begin. Standard procedure for all Coalition candidates." Of course, Morrison agreed, though she noted the slight emphasis on candidates rather than soldiers. The human team was escorted through corridors that seemed designed for beings much larger than humans. The ceilings soared overhead, and the walls were covered with displays showing real-time information about Coalition fleet movements, Devourer sightings, and tactical analyses in dozens of alien languages. Their first stop was a medical facility where Dr. Millith waited with an array of scanning equipment that looked more like abstract sculpture than medical devices. The xenobiologist's crystalline features reflected the room's ambient lighting as she gestured for the humans to approach. "This is fascinating," Dr. Millith commented as she began her scans. "Your bone density is remarkably low compared to Gravity World species, yet you show evidence of rapid healing from multiple injuries. How is this possible?" Sergeant Santos submitted to the scanning with military patience. "We adapt, ma'am. Humans heal fast when they need to. But your muscle fiber composition should make rapid movement impossible, yet your service records indicate exceptional performance in mobile combat situations. The physics don't align with observed results." Lieutenant Commander Chen exchanged glances with her teammates. "Maybe there's more to human physiology than shows up on scans?" Dr. Millith continued her examination, growing more puzzled with each result. Human soldiers showed stress markers that should indicate chronic fatigue, yet they remained alert and responsive. Their neural activity patterns were chaotic compared to other species, yet they demonstrated clear tactical thinking. "General Morrison," Dr. Millith said finally, "your soldiers' biological readings are inconsistent with their performance capabilities. Are you certain these individuals represent typical human military personnel?" "They represent what human soldiers become under pressure," Morrison replied carefully. "We don't always perform according to specifications." The next evaluation was conducted by General Karath in a facility designed to test combat reflexes and decision-making speed. Human soldiers were presented with tactical scenarios on holographic displays, required to identify threats and select appropriate responses as quickly as possible. Private Johnson faced a scenario showing hostile forces approaching a civilian population. The optimal solution, according to Coalition doctrine, was to establish a defensive perimeter and call for air support. Instead, Johnson studied the display for several seconds before selecting a more aggressive approach, infiltrating enemy lines to gather intelligence while simultaneously evacuating civilians. "Inefficient," General Karath declared, his scales shifting to an annoyed red. The human delayed decision-making and chose a needlessly complex solution. Coalition doctrine emphasizes rapid, decisive action. With respect, General, Johnson replied quietly, your doctrine assumes you have air support available. What if you don't? Then, you establish the best possible defensive position and wait for reinforcements. And if reinforcements don't come in time? What if the enemy has capabilities you don't know about? Sometimes you need more information before making decisions. General Karatha's scales shifted to a deeper red. Combat situations require immediate responses. Hesitation equals death. Rushing into situations you don't understand also equals death, Johnson countered. Sometimes the right answer isn't the fastest answer. Similar patterns emerged throughout the evaluations. Human soldiers consistently scored lower on tests designed to measure raw reaction speed and individual combat prowess. However, their approaches to tactical problems were often unconventional, factoring in variables that coalition doctrine didn't emphasize. Commander Veltar observed a communication exercise where Corporal Kim was required to coordinate between multiple units using coalition technology. The alien communication systems operated through direct neural interfaces, allowing instant sharing of tactical information between all connected units. Kim struggled with the interface initially, his human brain not naturally compatible with the alien technology. However, he quickly adapted by using the system in ways it wasn't designed for, creating redundant communication channels and establishing backup protocols that the aliens hadn't considered necessary. Why are you creating so many communication pathways? Commander Veltar asked. The neural network provides instant, perfect information sharing. Redundancy is inefficient. What happens if the network gets jammed or compromised? Kim replied, still working to establish his backup systems. On Earth, we assume our communications will be interrupted or intercepted. Having multiple ways to maintain contact keeps units coordinated when everything goes wrong. Coalition technology doesn't fail in such primitive ways, Veltar said dismissively. Ma'am, every technology fails eventually. The question is whether you're ready when it happens. As the evaluations concluded, the alien representatives gathered to review the results. The data painted a clear picture: human soldiers were slower, weaker, and less capable than coalition standards in virtually every measurable category. Yet there were anomalies in the results that didn't fit expected patterns. Admiral ZYXTH studied the compiled reports with growing confusion. Dr. Millith, explain these physiological readings. How can beings with such limited physical capabilities perform at levels that should be impossible for their biology? I'm not certain, Dr. Millith admitted. Their stress responses are unlike any species we've encountered. Most beings become less capable under pressure, but humans seem to access reserve capabilities that don't show up in baseline measurements. General Karath dismissed the observation with a wave of his clawed hand. Adrenaline responses are common among primitive species. It's a survival mechanism that provides temporary enhancement at the cost of long-term damage. But the duration and consistency suggest something more complex, Dr. Millith insisted. These soldiers maintain enhanced performance for extended periods without the typical degradation we see in other species. Commander Veltar consulted her datapads. Regardless of any anomalies, the objective measurements are clear. Human soldiers fail to meet coalition standards in every major category. The simulations will confirm what we already know. Meanwhile, the human soldiers had been assigned quarters near the simulation chambers. The rooms were spacious by human standards but felt alien and uncomfortable. The furniture was designed for beings with different proportions, and the lighting operated at frequencies that human eyes found slightly harsh. Sergeant Major Torres gathered the team for a final briefing. Listen up, people. We all know what the aliens think of us. They've been polite about it, but they expect us to embarrass ourselves in these simulations. So what's the plan? Asked Lieutenant Commander Chen. Fight their scenarios the way they expect, or show them something different? General Morrison entered the room, having concluded her own meetings with coalition leadership. They've designed scenarios based on their understanding of optimal tactics. They expect efficiency, speed, and overwhelming application of superior technology. Which we don't have, noted Sergeant Santos. Which we don't have, Morrison agreed. So we play to our strengths instead. Adaptability, creativity, and the ability to function effectively when everything goes wrong. Private Johnson looked up from cleaning his rifle. Ma'am, what if we actually can't compete? What if they're right and we're just not good enough for this level of warfare? Morrison met each soldier's eyes in turn. Then, we find out exactly how much fight humans have in them. The aliens are about to learn something about us that doesn't show up in their scans or their doctrine manuals. The simulation chambers awaited, along with challenges designed by the finest military minds in the galaxy. What those minds didn't understand was that human soldiers had spent their entire history fighting enemies with superior numbers, better equipment, and tactical advantages. They had learned to win not by being stronger or faster, but by being more determined and more adaptable than their opponents. The tests were about to begin, and both sides would learn things about warfare that their textbooks had never taught them. The simulation chamber was a marvel of coalition technology, a seamless sphere 50 meters in diameter lined with holographic projectors capable of creating environments indistinguishable from reality. The human soldiers stood at the entry point, checking their equipment one final time as alien observers filled the observation deck above. Admiral ZYXTH's voice echoed through the chamber's communication system. The first scenario is urban combat pacification. You will clear a city district of hostile forces while protecting civilian populations. This simulation is based on actual operations conducted by Valerian shock troops on Kepler-7. The chamber dissolved around them, replaced by a war-torn cityscape that could have been lifted from any human conflict zone. Broken buildings stretched in every direction, their shattered windows and crumbling walls providing countless hiding places for enemies. The acrid smell of smoke filled the air, and distant explosions suggested ongoing combat throughout the area. Time limit, 2 hours, continued Admiral ZYXTH. Enemy forces, approximately 200 hostiles with coalition standard weapons. Civilian population, 500 non-combatants requiring protection. You may begin. Immediately, plasma bolts began raining down from concealed positions throughout the district. The human soldiers scattered for cover as energy beams scorched the ground where they had been standing. Traditional coalition doctrine called for immediate suppressive fire and rapid advancement to establish fire superiority. Instead, General Morrison signaled for her team to hold position and observe. For 30 seconds that felt like hours, they remained behind cover while enemy fire continued to pour down from multiple directions. The alien observers exchanged confused communications, unable to understand why the humans weren't responding. "Ma'am," whispered Sergeant Santos, crouched behind a destroyed vehicle, "they've got us pinned down pretty good. Shouldn't we be moving?" "Wait," Morrison replied, studying the pattern of enemy fire. "Count the muzzle flashes. Listen to the timing between volleys." Private Johnson, pressed against a concrete barrier, used his sniper scope to scan the surrounding buildings. "I count 12 distinct firing positions, but the rate of fire suggests maybe 30 or 40 shooters total. They're moving between positions. Mobile defense," observed Lieutenant Commander Chen. "They're trying to make us think there are more of them than there actually are." Morrison nodded. "Classic guerrilla tactics. The question is, where are the civilians?" The answer came in the form of screams from a building 2 blocks away. Through the smoke, they could see figures moving past broken windows, some clearly non-combatants trying to escape the combat zone. "Coalition doctrine would establish a perimeter here and systematically clear each building," Morrison said into her radio. "But that would take hours, and those civilians don't have hours." She made a decision that would have been considered reckless by coalition standards. "Santos, Chen, take Johnson and circle around to the east. Get to that civilian building and start evacuation. Torres, Kim, you're with me. We're going to give them something to shoot at." The alien observers watched in bewilderment as the human force split into smaller groups. Coalition tactical doctrine emphasized maintaining unit cohesion and overwhelming firepower. Dividing forces in enemy territory was considered a fundamental error. General Karatha's scales shifted to an amused yellow. They're already making basic tactical mistakes. This will be over quickly. Morrison's group began what appeared to be a reckless frontal assault, moving from cover to cover while drawing enemy fire. But their movement wasn't random. Each position they took was calculated to pull hostile attention away from the eastern approach where Santos' team was moving. Contact front. Torres called out as enemy soldiers appeared in the windows above them. The distinctive whine of plasma weapons filled the air as energy bolts scorched the walls around the humans. The return fire from human weapons surprised the alien observers. Instead of the expected rapid, overwhelming response, the humans fired in carefully controlled bursts. Each shot was aimed with precision, targeting not just enemies but strategic points that would force hostile forces to reposition. Johnson, moving with Santos' group, used his rifle to systematically eliminate enemy snipers who had positioned themselves to cover escape routes from the civilian building. His shots weren't just neutralizing threats, they were creating safe corridors for evacuation. Inefficient use of ammunition, noted Commander Veltar. Human weapons require multiple hits to neutralize targets. They should be using suppressive fire. But, look at the results, Dr. Millith observed, studying her readings. Their precision is forcing enemy units to abandon optimal positions. The hostile forces are being herded into predictable locations. What the aliens were witnessing was a fundamental difference in tactical philosophy. Coalition forces relied on technological superiority to overwhelm enemies quickly and decisively. Human forces had learned to fight prolonged engagements against superior opponents, using terrain, timing, and psychology as weapons. Santos' team reached the civilian building to find a situation that would have challenged any coalition unit. The building was partially collapsed, with civilians trapped on multiple floors. Enemy forces had positioned themselves among the non-combatants, making direct assault impossible without massive civilian casualties. Standard procedure would be to call for orbital bombardment of the entire building, Chen observed grimly. Write off the civilian casualties as unavoidable. That's not how we do things, Santos replied, studying the building's structure. Kim, can you get communications to the civilians inside? Corporal Kim activated his equipment, scanning for local communication networks. Coalition technology would have jammed all transmissions to deny enemies coordination, but Kim's human-designed systems operated on different principles. I've got something, Kim reported. Local emergency frequencies are still active. There are civilians with working communicators inside. What followed was something no coalition tactical manual had ever considered. The human soldiers began coordinating with the civilians themselves, turning the trapped non-combatants into active participants in their own rescue. Through Kim's communications, civilians reported enemy positions, structural damage, and safe routes through the building. The humans guided them in creating diversions, blocking hostile sightlines, and even conducting basic medical aid for wounded civilians. This is highly irregular, Admiral ZYXTH commented from the observation deck. Military operations should not involve civilian participation. But, it's working, Dr. Millith noted, watching as streams of non-combatants began evacuating through routes that should have been impossible to secure. Meanwhile, Morrison's team had identified the core of the enemy defense, a command post in a fortified building that was coordinating the mobile defense. Coalition doctrine would call for a direct assault with maximum firepower, but the humans had noticed something their alien observers missed. Torres, look at the power lines, Morrison pointed out. The enemy communications are running through the civilian infrastructure. They didn't want to damage it because they need it functional. So if we cut the power, Torres began. We don't just blind them, we force them to choose between losing coordination and revealing their positions to restore communications. The humans began systematically targeting infrastructure rather than enemy positions. Power lines, communication nodes, and water mains became primary objectives. Each cut forced the enemy to adapt, but also limited their options. They're fighting the environment instead of the enemy, General Karath observed with growing confusion. This approach will take much longer than direct engagement. But, look at the civilian casualty count, Ambassador Thexare interjected, her energy field pulsing with interest. It's remarkably low considering the urban environment. As the simulation continued, the human approach began to pay dividends. Enemy forces, cut off from centralized command and dealing with infrastructure failures, began making mistakes. Units moved out of concealment to restore communications, providing targets for Johnson's precision fire. Others abandoned strong positions when utilities they depended on were severed. The civilian evacuation accelerated as the human soldiers established an ever-expanding network of safe zones. Rather than clearing areas and moving on, they maintained presence in secured regions, allowing civilians to move freely between protected areas. Time remaining, 30 minutes, announced Admiral ZYXTH. By coalition standards, the humans should have been nowhere near completing their objectives. They had engaged a fraction of the enemy forces in direct combat, their advance appeared chaotic and disorganized, and they had spent enormous amounts of time on civilian protection that should have been a secondary concern. Yet when the simulation ended, the results defied expectation. All 500 civilians had been successfully evacuated with 0 casualties. Enemy forces had been neutralized or driven from the district, not through direct combat but through systematic disruption of their operational capabilities. The human soldiers had achieved victory without firing a shot in anger for the final 45 minutes of the engagement. The alien observers fell silent as the holographic environment dissolved, returning the chamber to its neutral state. Data screens showed statistics that didn't align with any tactical doctrine they understood. Ammunition expenditure, 73% below coalition averages, reported Commander Veltar, checking and rechecking her figures. Civilian casualties, 0%, added Dr. Millif. This is unprecedented for urban combat scenarios. Enemy neutralization rate, 97%, concluded General Karoth, his scales cycling through confused color patterns. But direct engagement rate was only 12%. How is this mathematically possible? General Morrison stood with her team in the center of the chamber, their equipment showing the wear of 2 hours of intensive operations. None of them appeared particularly exhausted, despite having completed what should have been an extremely demanding simulation. General Morrison, Admiral ZYXTH spoke through the communication system, "Please explain your tactical approach. Your methods do not correspond to any recognized military doctrine." Admiral, Morrison replied, "You designed this scenario based on how your forces would approach the problem. Fast, direct, overwhelming application of superior firepower. You assumed we would try to match that approach with inferior capabilities. What approach did you use instead?" Morrison gestured to her team. "We fought the battle we could win instead of the battle you expected. Our soldiers didn't try to be faster or stronger than the enemy. They were smarter, more patient, and more adaptable." Sergeant Santos stepped forward. "Sir, where I grew up, you learned not to fight fair. You fought smart. You used everything available, the terrain, the people, the environment. You made your enemy's advantages work against them. This simulation represented a standard coalition operation," General Karoth protested. "Your methods would be impossible to replicate against real devourer forces." "Would they?" Morrison asked. "Have your standard methods been effective against the devourers so far?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Every being in the observation deck knew the answer. Coalition forces had suffered devastating losses in every encounter with the machine swarms. Standard tactics had proven inadequate against an enemy that learned and adapted faster than military doctrine could evolve. "Prepare the second simulation," Admiral ZYXTH ordered finally. "We need to see if this was an anomaly or a consistent capability." As the humans checked their equipment and prepared for the next challenge, conversations erupted among the alien observers. What they had witnessed challenged fundamental assumptions about warfare, tactics, and the relationship between technological superiority and battlefield effectiveness. The second simulation was already loading, designed to test human capabilities in an environment where their unconventional approaches should prove useless, space-based combat where there was no terrain to exploit, no civilians to coordinate with, and no infrastructure to manipulate. The alien military experts were certain this would expose the limitations of human tactics. What they didn't realize was that humans had spent their entire history learning to find advantages in situations where no advantages should exist. The simulation chamber transformed into the cold vacuum of space, surrounding the human soldiers with the star-filled darkness of the void. They now wore Coalition-provided environmental suits, bulky affairs designed for multiple species but not optimized for human physiology. Around them materialized a damaged space station, its hull breached in multiple places, atmosphere venting in crystalline streams. Admiral ZYXTH's voice crackled through their suit communicators. Scenario 2, Deep Spaceboarding Action. Your objective is to secure the research station Quantum Dawn before enemy forces can capture or destroy critical data. Enemy strength, unknown. Hostile reinforcements will arrive in 90 minutes. The human team floated near the station's emergency airlock, studying the massive structure through their helmet displays. The station was roughly cylindrical, 2 kilometers long and half a kilometer in diameter, with multiple rings of habitat modules connected by a central spine. Damage patterns suggested recent combat, and occasional flashes from within indicated ongoing fighting. Intelligence reports suggest the station's crew initiated lockdown protocols before being overrun, continued the Admiral. Data cores are secured behind multiple layers of defense, but enemy forces are attempting to break through. You must reach the cores first. Private Johnson activated his suit's sensor package, scanning the station's exterior. Ma'am, I'm reading multiple breach points. Looks like the bad guys came in from at least 6 different directions. Lieutenant Commander Chen studied the tactical display. Standard Coalition approach would be to choose the largest breach and fight through to the objective. Maximum force, shortest route. Which is exactly what they expect, General Morrison observed. And exactly what the enemy will be prepared for. Instead of heading for the obvious entry points, Morrison led her team to what appeared to be an undamaged section of the station's hull. The aliens watching from the observation deck exchanged confused communications as the humans began deploying cutting equipment. General Karatha's scales shifted to an irritated red. They're creating their own entry point? This will take precious time. Enemy forces are already inside, securing the objective while the humans waste time on unnecessary demolition work. But, observe their positioning, Dr. Millith noted, studying the sensor readings. They're not cutting randomly. They've selected a location that provides access to multiple internal routes. The humans worked with practiced efficiency, Sergeant Santos and Corporal Kim operating plasma cutters while the others maintained overwatch. Within minutes, they had opened a new breach into a section of the station that showed no signs of enemy presence. Clean entry, Torres reported as they moved inside. No immediate contacts, and were bypassing their perimeter entirely. The station's interior was a maze of corridors, maintenance shafts, and habitat modules. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows, and the sound of distant weapons fire echoed through the ventilation systems. Coalition forces would have moved directly toward the sound of combat, engaging enemies en route to the objective. The humans took a different approach. Using Kim's communication skills, they began accessing the station's internal networks, not to gather intelligence on enemy positions, but to understand the facility's layout and operational status. I've got access to the environmental systems, Kim reported. Artificial gravity is functioning in most sections, but life support is compromised in the outer rings. What about the crew? Morrison asked. According to internal sensors, there are still survivors. They've barricaded themselves in secure areas, but some are trapped in zones the enemy is advancing through. This created a dilemma that Coalition doctrine addressed simply: the mission objective took priority over rescue operations. Attempting to save trapped civilians would compromise the primary goal and likely result in higher casualties overall. Morrison made a decision that would have been considered tactically unsound by any military manual in the galaxy. Santos, Chen, take Johnson and head for the data cores. Torres, Kim, you're with me. We're going after the survivors. The alien observers reacted with immediate protests. Commander Veltar's mandibles clicked rapidly, the equivalent of human stuttering. They're dividing their forces again. The mission parameters were clear: secure the data cores. Rescue operations were not included. They're repeating the same tactical error from the urban scenario, General Karath observed. splitting minimal forces in hostile territory is suicide. Admiral ZYXTH watched the display with growing confusion. Perhaps they don't understand the complexity of space-based operations. The vacuum environment doesn't allow for the improvisation they demonstrated in the city simulation. Morrison's group moved through the station's service corridors, areas too cramped for most coalition species but perfectly sized for human operators. They used maintenance shafts and emergency passages to reach trapped crew members, finding groups of alien researchers and technicians who had been cut off when the attack began. Human soldiers, one of the trapped aliens gasped as Torres helped him from a sealed laboratory. But, you should be advancing on the primary objective. Why are you here? Because leaving people behind isn't how we operate, Morrison replied simply. Can you help us navigate to other survivor groups? What followed was another example of human tactical thinking that baffled their observers. Instead of simply evacuating the rescued crew, Morrison began organizing them into a support network. The alien civilians, familiar with the station's systems, became guides and coordinators, helping the human soldiers move efficiently through areas that would have been maze-like to outside forces. Meanwhile, Santos led her smaller team toward the data cores through routes that the rescued crew had identified as less heavily defended. Rather than fighting their way through enemy concentrations, they used the station's own layout against the invading forces. Contact front, Johnson reported quietly as they approached a junction leading to the secure data center. I count 8 hostiles, positioned to cover the main approach corridors. Coalition doctrine would call for overwhelming firepower to eliminate the enemy position quickly. Santos studied the tactical situation and chose a different approach. Using the station's artificial gravity generators, Kim created selective gravity wells that disoriented the enemy forces without alerting them to the human presence. They're fighting the environment again, observed Dr. Milleth from the observation deck. Using the station's systems as weapons. But, it's effective, admitted Commander Veltar grudgingly. The enemy forces are responding to system malfunctions rather than direct threats. They don't realize they're under attack. The human approach to space combat proved as unconventional as their urban tactics. Rather than relying on superior firepower or technology, they turned the battlefield itself into an ally. Environmental systems, structural features, and even the enemy's own expectations became weapons in human hands. Morrison's rescue operations had an unexpected tactical benefit. The crew members they saved provided detailed intelligence about enemy positions, system vulnerabilities, and alternate routes through the station. Information that would have taken coalition forces hours to gather through direct reconnaissance was obtained through simple conversation with people who worked on the station every day. 30 minutes remaining, announced Admiral ZYXTH. Enemy reinforcements are approaching. All forces must reach primary objectives or face overwhelming opposition. Santos' team had reached the data center, but found it defended by automated systems that coalition forces would have disabled through brute force hacking. Instead, they used information provided by rescued crew members to access maintenance protocols that shut down defenses without triggering security alerts. Data cores secured, Santos reported as her team began downloading critical information. But, we've got incoming hostiles. Looks like they've realized what we're doing. Roger that, Morrison replied from across the station where her group was evacuating the last survivor group. Fall back to extraction point Alpha. We'll cover your withdrawal. What happened next would be discussed in military academies for generations. Instead of retreating separately, the human forces conducted a coordinated withdrawal that used rescued civilians as intelligence coordinators, environmental systems as defensive barriers, and the station's own structure as both concealment and mobility enhancement. The enemy forces, trained in conventional space combat tactics, found themselves completely unable to adapt to the human approach. Every time they moved to engage one group, they discovered their targets had vanished through passages they didn't know existed, coordinated by people they hadn't considered threats, using systems they hadn't thought to secure. 10 minutes remaining, Admiral ZYXTH announced, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. The human extraction was a masterpiece of unconventional tactics. They didn't fight their way out through main corridors, they used service tunnels and emergency passages. They didn't abandon the people they had rescued, they integrated them into the operation as active participants. They didn't engage enemy forces directly unless absolutely necessary, they maneuvered opponents into disadvantageous positions and, then, bypassed them entirely. When the simulation ended, the results were even more shocking than the urban combat scenario. The human forces had secured the primary objective, rescued all survivors, and suffered 0 casualties. Enemy forces had been neutralized or avoided entirely, and the operation had been completed with time to spare. The alien observers sat in stunned silence as the statistics appeared on their displays. Every measurable metric defied conventional military wisdom. Mission completion rate, 100%, Commander Veltar reported in disbelief. Casualty rate, 0%, both military and civilian, added Dr. Millif. Resource expenditure, 40% below projected requirements, concluded General Korath, his scales cycling through colors that indicated complete bewilderment. General Morrison stood with her team in the center of the chamber as the simulation environment faded away. They looked tired but not exhausted, having completed what should have been an impossible mission under conditions designed to highlight their species' limitations. Admiral ZYXTH's voice echoed through the chamber with new respect. General Morrison, I must ask, are these results representative of human military capabilities, or have you somehow selected extraordinary individuals for this demonstration? Morrison looked around at her soldiers, each of whom would have been considered average by human military standards. Admiral, these are good soldiers, but they're not superhuman. What you've seen is how human forces operate when they fight to their strengths instead of trying to match enemy advantages. Explain, Admiral ZYXTH requested. Your species developed military doctrine based on technological and physical superiority, Morrison said. You assume the best approach is to be faster, stronger, and more powerful than your enemies. Humans developed different approaches because we've spent our entire history being outclassed by our opponents. Sergeant Santos stepped forward. Sir, every human war has been fought by soldiers who were outnumbered, outgunned, or fighting enemies with better technology. We learn to win not by being superior, but by being more adaptable. The Devourers are machine intelligences, General Korath protested. They don't make emotional decisions or tactical errors. Your psychological warfare tactics won't work against artificial minds. Maybe not, Morrison agreed. But machines think in patterns, and patterns can be disrupted. They adapt to what they encounter, but they might not be prepared for approaches they've never seen before. Dr. Millith studied her readings with growing excitement. The implications are significant. If human tactical methodology can be integrated with coalition technology and resources. You want to run one more simulation, Admiral ZYXTH announced suddenly. A scenario based on actual Devourer encounters. No modifications, no allowances for human limitations. Face the enemy as they actually are. The chamber began reconfiguring itself for a final test. Around them appeared the scene of humanity's worst nightmare, a Devourer swarm in full assault mode. Mechanical entities the size of spacecraft moved in perfect coordination, their adaptive intelligence learning from every exchange of fire. This simulation is based on the Kepler Prime engagement, Admiral ZYXTH explained grimly. Coalition forces suffered 90% casualties in 15 minutes. The Devourers adapted to every tactic, every weapon, every strategy we employed. The human soldiers checked their weapons and equipment, knowing they were about to face the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy with technology their opponents had already learned to counter. But, as they prepared for the ultimate test, they carried something the Devourers had never encountered, the experience of a species that had always fought from a position of disadvantage. Begin simulation, Admiral ZYXTH commanded. What followed would determine not just humanity's role in the Galactic War, but whether the galaxy had any hope of stopping the Devourer swarms. The machines were about to encounter human soldiers for the first time, and both sides were about to learn lessons that would reshape the course of the conflict. As the first Devourer units appeared on the horizon, their adaptive algorithms already beginning to analyze human tactics, General Morrison smiled grimly. The aliens were about to discover that humans had been preparing for this fight their entire species' existence. They just hadn't known who their real enemy would be. The simulation engaged, and the galaxy held its breath.